Welcome to the Aid Market Podcast, where foreign aid partners connect to learn about key funding trends and market insight. The podcast is co-hosted by Aid Connect Data, the pipeline and market intel software for USAID partnering, and Connected International, the leading USAID partnering support consulting firm. Now, here's your host, Mike Shanley.
Welcome to the Aid Market Podcast. Today, we're excited to have Ambassador Mark Green joining us as a guest. Ambassador Green was a congressman representing Wisconsin. He was the U.S. ambassador to Tanzania in the State Department on the diplomatic side. He was on the MCC board of directors. He was the president of the International Republican Institute on the implementer side. And he was the former administrator for USAID under the Trump administration. Ambassador Green, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today.
Oh, it's great to be with you.
So you ran USAID and really had exceptional leadership, steering USAID through a period when development was being questioned. Today, we have the 75th anniversary NATO summit starting in Washington and critical elections taking place globally. Given that context, what do you say to people who question the role or the need for U.S. aid or foreign aid?
Well, first off, when I'm usually asked about leading USAID, I usually say it led me. I didn't lead it. But seriously, just a fantastic team, great experience, wonderful professionals. So, it's funny, when I first began, I was asked by outsiders why USAID matters. And I said, look, if we do this right, foreign assistance, development assistance can help us address just about every one of our foreign policy challenges. I believe in foreign assistance because it's in our interest, because I think it shows the right face to the rest of the world. It helps to build markets. Done right, it can help to stabilize countries and help countries take on the drivers of extremism. And of course, we respond to the humanitarian crises we see in so many parts of the world in ways that remind people that American leadership matters. So USAID, development assistance more broadly, done right, can make a world of difference. USAID is a fantastic team. We're in most countries in the world. We have wonderful professionals all around, very mission driven. So why it matters now, you're right, NATO is a reminder. So NATO's a reminder because it reminds us the power of alliances and relationships in taking on the challenges that the world is facing right now. Nobody believes the U.S. should go alone. And in fact, that's the criticism, that America too often goes alone. Well, this is one of the ways in which we don't go alone. We help to grow partners. We help to foster relationships. We help to build the capacity of other nations to join with us in taking on challenges. That's never been more important given the challenges that we're seeing today. We're seeing economic challenges in many parts of the world. We're seeing the fallout from climate extremes challenging many parts of the world. We have 130 million displaced people in the world right now. And of course, we see the fallout from authoritarianism on the march. All of these are significant challenges, and how they get addressed, I think, will shape the future in so many ways. I'm delighted that we're able to address those challenges by building alliances, strengthening partnerships, and I think USAID plays a critical role in that effort.
On that note, you mentioned looking forward. What do you see as the priorities and the role for USAID, MCC, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and other foreign aid bilateral and multilateral donors?
Well, first off, I think the key thing is to better align our development agencies. And that's something that we started to do, at least I hope we started to do in my tenure. We have a long way to go, but understand that these tools, and you mentioned just a few of them, USAID and MCC, obviously the DFC and many others, it's how we align them in ways that stops duplication and helps countries with where they are. So, when I look at the MCC, which works in a limited number of countries, but what it does to help countries take on what we see as the challenges to economic growth is vitally important and makes a huge difference. MCC doesn't work in abject poverty on matters of global health. It doesn't work on matters of women's empowerment and breaking down the barriers to participation. Those are things that USAID does very well. So you put them together, you can help on a continuum, help countries go from great challenges in places like Haiti to countries that are pretty close to becoming true market-based economies and contributors to the world economy.
So you mentioned aligning those various development, and then USDA does
Very much.
Foreign aid work as well. You said you didn't get all the way there. Did you see some early successes or some examples of good ways to convene the various development agencies and actors? Or was there any early successes you saw in properly aligning those agencies and those efforts?
Yes. So I think Prosper Africa, Power Africa, which PEPFAR, these are true multi-agency efforts. And I think they are working well together in those settings. I think more broadly, the adoption of the roadmap metrics that we put together, as you know, as your listeners know, those who are close watchers of development, I believe with all of my heart that our goal must be to help people help themselves, what I call the journey to self-reliance. I want countries and communities to go from being aid recipients to partners to, in a perfect world, fellow donors. We get there by working closely and understanding where countries are, what are the barriers to rising, and trying to address those. The fact that we got more and more parts of the executive branch in particular talking about things like self-reliance, talking about things like growth-based policies, I saw that as an early sign. Also, in my travels since I left USAID, I've been very pleased with foreign partners, but also with the USAID missions around the world. When we have a chance to meet, they bring up how well that notion has resonated with partners. So early days, but I do believe that we're heading in the right direction.
Well, let's talk more about the accomplishments under your leadership at USAID, Journey to Self-Reliance, the origins of the DFC, the new partnerships initiative. Could you take a little time and share your thoughts both on those initiatives and also how you've seen them evolve or develop under the current administration?
So, first off, when I arrived at USAID, there were two interesting outside views, both of which were wrong. One was that because I was coming in from the outside, because I was a Republican, that somehow we were going to take things apart. I heard it all the time. Are you going to take apart Feed the Future? My response was, why would I take apart something that's working? What I tried to do was not launch new bureaucratic initiatives, but to try to help make things work better. We had looked at it, and USAID had gone through a reform effort every 20 years or so, and we were well past due. So what I did was to convene all of our career professionals. And I say, look, this isn't partisan. If it's partisan, it will last as long as the administration. I'm not interested. What I want to do is get your best advice on how we can update, how we can make things work more efficiently, more effectively. And that's the effort that we undertook, all led by our career teams. They were the ones who came up with the metrics. They had much greater experience than I did. And so I was really impressed with that effort. So that really undergirds almost everything that we tried to do. So that was the first approach that I'm proud of. I think secondly, helping to understand the nature of today's challenges. So my first trip overseas, I went to the Horn of Africa. I went to Ethiopia. I went to Sudan. I went to South Sudan. And I remember seeing the fallout from years of drought in Ethiopia, teetering on the edge of full-scale famine. And so we looked at ways to bolster resistance. to take some of the development tools that we had and to take pieces of them and align them with our humanitarian assistance in ways that would build resilience, do some basic empowerment and training and awareness building to help people plan for the future and future shocks. That work I feel very good about, and I think that is continuing today. So I'm proud of that work in particular. We also tried to make inroads in repairing some of the damage that groups like ISIS had left behind as they swept through parts, particularly northern Iraq. And so we did some work trying to work to restore communities there. And that's really where we came up with some of the procurement reforms that we did, engage more in conversations, stretching the rules to make sure that we were doing true collaboration. In my estimation, one of the problems that we have at USAID is that we've seen the number of partners shrinking, and the number overall shrinks, I think, because we don't realize that the barrier to engagement is too high. And so what we did is look at ways of creating conversations to make it easier for more partners and potential partners to be in the room. We think we get better proposals that way. And I think we get more community-oriented proposals that way. We tested it in northern Iraq, and to my great surprise, it actually worked and worked reasonably well. And so now we're looking, I'd like to see that expanded in more places. I mean, the world's on fire. This is a difficult time, I think, for development, given the fallout from the crises that we see. But I think the reforms that we undertook, I think can be part of the answer as we look to move forward.
And you mentioned that you were looking for nonpartisan solutions. One thing that we share with clients and organizations globally is the new partnerships initiative from the Trump to Biden administration was not canceled, was not rebranded. The name was kept, and it was actually amplified further. So I think that, that notes a success there from you and your team in designing something that is maybe politically resilient. Is the right way to describe it. You touched on humanitarian assistance versus long-term development. Could you talk a little bit about your take on that, trends you've seen in that area, and how you see humanitarian funding affecting long-term development funding?
Boy, you've sort of hit the nail on the head in terms of what I see as one of the great challenges facing the development community right now. And I know that Samantha feels the same way. There is a real danger that humanitarian assistance will begin to cannibalize development assistance. And some of it is completely understandable. Humanitarian assistance responds to emergency needs, and there are emergencies right now, perhaps greater than we've ever seen. So it's natural. Humanitarian assistance is politically the most popular assistance. Everybody understands that sort of moral obligation. But there are a number of challenges. Number one, too many countries in the world are not stepping up to the plate. The US is far and away the largest donor. Nobody else is even close. China and Russia are not in the top 20. That's unforgivable, in my opinion. Humanitarian assistance is an absolute obligation, I think, right now. So, we need to see more partners step up to the plate. It simply has to happen. But, I do a lot of work on human displacement. When I look at displaced communities, and again, 130 million, if you include both refugees and IDPs, humanitarian assistance is treatment, not cure. We really have to find ways to help build the resilience of displaced communities, the educational opportunities, the skills training, the know-how, so that they can, Lord willing, the gate opens, the fence comes down, whatever imagery you want to use, that they're not the most vulnerable people on earth, that they have a chance to fulfill their dreams, have a chance to be contributors. And so as we're doing humanitarian assistance, we can't lose sight of the need to invest in those development tools. And it is a great challenge for us because again, the money is tough. We all get that, but it's something I'm very passionate about because everywhere I've gone, people want the same thing. People who have had to flee conflict, they want the same thing. That what we call the American dream isn't just the American dream; it's the universal dream, and we have to make sure that we invest in that. And that's where development assistance comes in. So it's terribly important. I also see enormous opportunity. So humanitarian assistance, the technology that is available is impressive, and the opportunities, I think, are fantastic. My friend and former colleague Henrietta simply says that we should challenge the business community to connect every refugee camp in the world to the internet. And you know what? She's not wrong, right? The possibilities that we have with 3D printers and connecting for educational opportunities and distance learning, all of that, I really think that has to be a grand purpose that we undertake. That's one of the ways that we bridge that gap between humanitarian and development. So there are challenges that are worrisome. On the other hand, there's no reason that we can't find ways to optimize both. Last piece I'll say on it, we too often forget host communities. And that's something that in my tenure, we tried to undertake. So, every administrator will tell you the 2 or 3 crises that he or she faced, right? There were unforeseen things that happened. In my case, among them was the Venezuelan out migration, right? The largest mass migration in the history of the Americas. And we tried not only to help on the humanitarian needs of those poor Venezuelans forced into flight, but we tried to make sure that we reinforced communities in places like Colombia in particular, but elsewhere, so that they were able to see economic growth, stability, and able to withstand the challenges that come with sudden influx of new neighbors and new residents. And that is terrifically important work. And it is something that we undertook that I quite frankly don't think we received enough recognition for. And it's not so much us, it's Congress. I think we need to recognize at a time when Congress doesn't seem to be able to agree the colors of the US flag, they agreed upon this, bipartisan. They mobilize resources, they help Colombia, and they help those communities. Same thing is true in Jordan. The work that's done in Jordan. And so those are success stories, again, areas that bridge humanitarian and development that help us realize that there are things that the parties agree upon. There are grand traditions in America's foreign policy, and it should help keep us hopeful for the future.
A couple of things I want to come back to there, but you did mention China and Russia. Under your tenure leading USAID, what was the, I don't know, in what context or how did you all frame the alternative development models offered, maybe at least by China, as you were developing priorities and going through the procurement processes?
So one thing, I think sometimes people miss the best American response to the challenge of great power competition, as it's often called. So China has the Belt and Road Initiative. Some estimates $1 trillion. If we think that we are going to be China light and mobilize money like they do, we're not, neither in sums of money nor in approach. We should make sure that we are using tools like the DFC and our friends at Exim Bank to mobilize resources in ways that responsibly help countries take on challenges, particularly in the infrastructure area. But we sometimes forget that what we offer, the bargain that we offer, the vision that we offer, that's our advantage. Again, we want to help countries go from being aid recipients to partners to fellow donors. We want countries to rise so they have a seat at the table and they work with us and they work with like-minded countries to take on the world's challenges. We believe in self-reliance. If a Chinese investment helps a community become more self-reliant, someone in Beijing is going to lose his job because they seek the opposite. They want countries to be dependent. And it's a stark difference. And talking about that difference, and it's not an exaggeration, it's absolutely on the mark. That is our advantage because every human being wants to be self-reliant. Every country wants to shape its own future. We should take that stark difference and talk about it everywhere we go. We should also do some other things. We should demand transparency. First off, let me say, when it comes to things like humanitarian assistance and taking on the challenges of new energy and climate extremes, China is welcome. We want China to come to the table and play a role. I would love to see China outspend us on humanitarian assistance. It would be great. They won't, and they aren't. And I think we should make sure people realize that. But we should call for transparency. We should simply say that we only ask China to be as transparent as we are in our dealings with foreign countries, and then let the world judge as it will. I think transparency. And then secondly, it's reciprocity. We need to help people realize that our businesses are not given anywhere near the access and the protections in China and in countries that are Chinese influenced as businesses from those countries have here. We demand reciprocity. So those are topics that we don't talk about often enough. But when I was ambassador in Tanzania, and China has a long history in Tanzania, China recognized the United Republic of Tanzania before the US did 50 years ago. So they have a long history there. My view is always to invite China to work with us in taking on challenges of development. It rarely happens, but I would love to see them do those things because it's to everybody's benefit. That's what responsible countries should do. It's not happening, but there's no reason that we should walk away from Chinese engagement in things like humanitarian assistance.
On that note, transitioning to Ukraine, you were recently in Ukraine, traveled widely throughout the country. Could you share your assessment of the current state of the war and Ukraine's defense, as well as what you would like to see support for Ukraine looking like going forward? Also, in our prep, you mentioned you'll be at an event with Ukrainian President Zelensky tonight in Washington. It'd be great to get your take as well on the NATO summit and potential outcomes you hope to see from this week.
Well, so 10 years ago this spring, I was an election observer in Ukraine for their first post-Euromaidan election. And I was there with Madeleine Albright. She led the one of the delegations that went, and it was an uplifting, inspirational experience. I watched Ukrainians standing in line for hours for a chance to vote. I watched election commissioners, truly courageous election commissioners, staying there all day to administer the elections. In one area, the election commissioners told us that the night before the voting, they received anonymous text messages simply saying, "We know where you live." I mean, the threats that they were under, and yet they spoke and delivered democracy. Quite frankly, I see that same inspirational courage today manifested in their efforts to liberate their country from authoritarian Russia's invasion and takeover. So my takeaways from the trip: I traveled 1,300 miles. I traveled all around the country, did overnight train. We were in the bomb shelters at various times because air raid sirens would go off all the time. Number one, I was struck by the extraordinary resilience of the Ukrainian people. what they said to me in a number of places, it's their national motto. They say, "Tell America we are tired but not exhausted." And they kept saying it over and over again. I watched them after a missile strike, 24 hours later, already working to repair the building. I watched students going to classroom in subway stations because their schools had been blown up. And I watched them try to get some sense of normalcy and continue to rise as a nation. Quite extraordinary. The damage is incredible. The Russians have been indiscriminate. They have attacked civilian targets. In the last 24 hours, they hit the largest children's hospital in the country. My Lord, that with a cruise missile. That is incredible. The inhumanity of it. And yet the Ukrainians will battle on. So that was extraordinary. Secondly, another takeaway, they see this differently than we do. Too much of the press here, I think, it portrays this in bilateral terms. This is a simple fight between Ukraine and Russia. Not really. They don't see it that way, and Europe doesn't see it that way. They see it as authoritarianism on the march. When I was in Moldova, which I went to before Ukraine, they said to me, "Look, we believe we're next." When I went to Poland, Warsaw, on the way back here, they said, "Look, this is 1939. So they really do see it in those terms. And then third, and this gets really back to development and humanitarian assistance, something I also don't think we talk about often enough. So Vladimir Putin has talked about a hybrid war, and we have to understand what a hybrid war means. So it certainly is the disinformation and misinformation that we see, and we saw it in Ukraine in advance of the invasion. By the way, other countries in the region are now seeing it, and they see that as the precursor. So we have to help them overcome that. But also, Putin is weaponizing human beings. He is purposefully displacing Ukrainians to Moldova and other places. And even in Russia, he has taken refugees in Russia and put them up against the border with Finland. And in all these efforts, these are all efforts to create political pressure, economic pressure, and to try to destabilize these countries. And so our response to a hybrid war has to be a hybrid response. That's why I was very pleased that the supplemental had humanitarian assistance in it, because helping Moldova and other countries help with those displaced communities, that's one of the ways that you respond to a hybrid attack like we've seen from Vladimir Putin. So this is unlike anything that we have seen before. And so I think our response has to be multifaceted. And again, I'm pleased with the supplemental. I think it is fair. It is a fair criticism to say that we have been a step slow. I think we need to get weapon systems that have been approved. We need to get them in Ukrainian hands as fast as we can. We have wasted some time, to be honest. But on the other hand, NATO is mobilized. NATO is energized. 23 countries have now gotten to the 2% level. I think more will do so. We just hosted the Secretary General of NATO at the Wilson Center, where I am president, and I was impressed with what I heard. So that's a reason to be hopeful. And NATO's presence they've opened up an office in Ukraine. Those are good things. I think that helps. In terms of Ukraine's future, Ukraine very much wants to be part of the EU, and the U.S. I think has a role to play in helping them. We can help to address some of the conditions that are obstacles. I think reconstruction should be led by Europe because they want to be part of Europe, and the U.S. has an important role to play. I think tools like our MCC approach compacts. I'm a big believer in compact-based assistance, and I think that can play a role in reconstruction. So challenging times, but the Ukrainian people continue to be inspirational. I'll look forward to seeing President Zelensky tonight and hearing him speak. These are, again, awfully important times.
So thank you for sharing that, Mark. Moving now to your time at USAID. One thing we like to do on this podcast is share the work of USAID staff so that partners can better understand what that day-to-day looks like, what your jobs are like, so that they can be better partners, better communicators with their USAID colleagues. I would assume every day is not the same as USAID Administrator, but could you maybe take us quickly through what a typical day might have looked like for you when you were the USAID Administrator?
Well, you're right that there were very few typical days, right? It was a constant changing work, but all interesting work and all work that I found deeply rewarding. So what I said when I first got to USAID is, look, I want a noisy front office. If you want to push back on something I'm saying, please do so. We don't always have to agree. I'm looking for your best ideas. And I was very fortunate because I always got it. They were very good. Again, are we lockstep on everything? No, and shouldn't be. Right? That would be wrong. We need to have that sense of debate and discussion. It was a challenging time in that there were always worries. They were uncertain about funding and such. And I said, look, my view is the best answer to all this is do our jobs and do them really well and help people realize the value that we bring, which I think is considerable. And I always got the team's best efforts. I learned a tremendous amount from them. And, I'd like to think that they felt that they had the chance to push back. And hopefully, in the debate and discussion, we found a way to get to the right answer. But it was a very good experience. I'm proud of the team that I serve with, and it was an important moment for me. I certainly enjoyed the work.
As the administrator, what were the pieces of information, the data points that were most crucial to you for decision making? Was it finding good success stories that you could communicate to the public or to Congress? Was it getting the hard data to understand which priorities are having the impact that you wanted, which ones aren't that you need to look at? What were some of those things that you really valued or looked for to help you make the right decisions in your leadership?
So I'm probably the worst traveling companion when it goes to visits to development sites, because on the first trip, I remember this, the natural inclination when you go on trips as administrator for USAID is your team wants to show you great things. And I would say, don't need to. I believe you're doing great. That's the default position, is you're doing important, good work. Show me what isn't working. Show me what isn't working and help me find ways to help you. And that was something I tried to push them on, because this work is too important. This isn't meant to be simply looking around and clapping hands and saying, boy, this is just great. I want to see what isn't working and see what we can do to address it. Secondly, I think it's really important for people in the development community, particularly at places like USAID, to not be shy about going to the Hill and pushing back. I had an excellent relationship on the Hill, both sides of the aisle, because if they asked me a question, I would always give them an answer, always. It may not be the answer they want to hear, but they knew it would at least be an honest, open answer. And we developed a level of trust that I think paid off in a number of ways. Secondly, sometimes I think at USAID, we're too shy about pushing back when there's incoming, when there's criticism. If a staffer in an office would question a project that we were doing, that it didn't have the results they wanted to see, sometimes they'd say, yeah, you know what, this is hard. This is really hard. If you would like us to do development in Denmark, we can. No problems. It's easy. We work in the hardest places on earth, and we try things. And I can tell you that they're based on our best efforts, on the best information that we've got. If they aren't, I will fix that. But sometimes this is really hard, and not everything works to perfection. And what I found was, and this is somehow a revelation, I think, to staff at USAID, most Hill staff say, okay, we get it. I think sometimes the development community gets too defensive when it's dealing with policymakers. Are there sort of bomb throwing critics? Sure, there are. This is the day and age in which we're living. But in my experience, throughout my career, including my career in politics, people really are trying to do the right thing. And so if you can show them why we're doing something, why it's working or not working, depending on the circumstances, in most cases, they're not there to play gotcha. They are there instead to try to understand. So I would encourage people in the development community, go to the Hill. Don't engage in happy talk, right? Because they get happy talk all the time. But just be honest and say, look, yeah, we're really proud of this. It's working really well. Nope, this isn't working quite as well. We tried to do this. This was the reasoning. This is the data we had. We're going to try something new. Because in my experience, Hill staff will nod their heads and find ways to be helpful.
And did you find that trust or that authenticity and transparency maybe built more trust also, and more champions on the Hill?
Yes, very much. Very much. It's so the most valuable diplomatic experience I ever had. I was an assistant whip when I was in the House of Representatives. And when I was an assistant whip, my job was to understand, for those who were my whip charges, to understand their districts at least as well as they did. And that's the same kind of thing that you need to do when you do go to the Hill. Understand where someone is coming from, what their district sees, what may be important to them, what the employers are and the industries are in their district. If they have, well, again, particularly in when it comes to employers, if they have diaspora communities, understand that, because it allows you to help them, help themselves. And I think that also works to build trust. I'd like to think that we had very good trust on both sides of the aisle. Again, that doesn't mean we always agreed. It does mean that we were respectful and understood that if there was a difference of opinion, it was based on principle or on limitations that we simply couldn't get around. So, yeah, I know that it is popular to say that everything's broken in our political system. Not everything's broken. There are good people trying to do the right thing. And I think that honest conversations will take you a long way.
So given that, what would your advice be for the next administrator? Obviously, we have the U.S. presidential elections in November. Even if it is a re-election of Biden, often there's a transition, or if a new administration comes in. What would your advice be, given the breadth of the conversation we've had, Mark, the geopolitical context, the political context, and then does that change depending on what type of administration comes in, or are there some core values or some core leadership points that you think would be the same regardless of the next administration?
Well, I think the administrator has to sharpen the tools in the toolbox, and then it is the White House, it's the president and the Secretary of State that will help to guide where those tools are deployed and for what ends. The great thing about working in development, again, I believe that development tools can be used to help address just about every challenge that we see in the world today. They aren't by themselves necessarily the answer, but they're part of the answer. And I think that that's key. I think also is trusting the team around you. Trust your team. Let them know that they have the ability to come in and shut the door and say, "Hey, I this is something I think you should know," or I have a different point of view. Trust your team. Trust your career professionals. They're in this because they're believers in the mission. And when they see that you also believe in the mission, again, there are always atmospherics that are different. But when they see that you share the motivation, there's nothing that you can't overcome.
And you mentioned earlier about initiatives, maybe PEPFAR, that have that bipartisan support or that broad support politically. What are some of those other initiatives or activities or programs that you have found really do have that broad political support in the U.S.?
Well, one that never gets talked about is our ability to respond to disasters. USAID plays the lead. And I had an experience. I'd only been administrator for a short period of time. I was walking up at the UN General Assembly, UNGA week, right after the second Mexico City earthquake. And I'm walking with two cell phones, one on each ear, as I'm trying to navigate what my team on the ground sees and what the White House wants me to do. USAID has an extraordinary ability to respond to disasters, to deploy a response team. As you know, a lot of the network is pre-positioned. We use warehouses around the world. It's quite an extraordinary story. I used to tease people that if USAID is on the front page of a newspaper, it's bad, right? It's a bad thing. Instead, we respond to disasters in ways that keep things off the front page. So, I don't think USAID gets a lot of thanks or a lot of glory or even a lot of gratitude. But when you start to tell the story about what it actually works on, what it's actually doing, I find people nod their heads and say, that's actually okay. That's not bad. That's a good thing. So people should feel proud. Is USAID everything it needs to be? No, we're going to be in a journey. My job, I used to tell people, I want us to be better than last week and not as good as next week. It's always looking for ways. There are new technologies. We learn new things, new approaches. There are lots of things that we can do, constantly pushing ourselves for self-improvement. I think is in America's best traditions, and I think aid is a crucial tool and will continue to be a crucial tool, regardless of who's in the White House. USAID has an important role to play, as does MCC. I'm an original co-author. I'm a big believer in the MCC. I think DFC, which is coming into its own, terrifically important part of the answer as well. So self-improvement and looking for ways to sharpen these tools in changing circumstances is something that really matters.
So as we wrap up here, what's something that gives you optimism about the future?
Oh, so I'm an optimist by nature, but what makes me most optimistic are young people. And I've had the chance to travel around much of the world, and everywhere I go, I meet young people with big dreams, young people with big ideas. They come up with ideas and approaches that I couldn't begin to come up with. And so I'm optimistic because as these young people, especially if we find ways to enhance their skills and their opportunities, that makes me really optimistic. There is a universality among our young people that gives me real hope.
Well, thank you for your time. As we wrap up, as the CEO of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, how can interested people best connect with your team or best follow your events and the Wilson Center's programming?
Just go to our website, and also I keep a blog. I do a blog every week called Stubborn Things, and my goal is to try to pick a fact that will startle people and help them to realize the context of some of the challenges and some of the approaches. But just go to our website, and we have events every week. This week, not in person, since the Reagan building is largely closed for NATO, but we're easy to find.
And where can people subscribe to your blog? Is that on the Wilson Center website?
Yeah, yes. Stubborn
Great.
Things.
Great. Well, Mark, thank you again for your leadership, all the work you've done in the past, and what's yet to come going forward. Really appreciate you taking some time to share your insight and expertise with our listeners on the Aid Market podcast today. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you for tuning in to the Aid Market podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and connect with Mike Shanley on LinkedIn to stay updated on the latest USAID funding trends.